Every powerful system in history begins with the same promise: order, stability, progress, a way to organize society more efficiently than what came before. And every time, the people who build it believe they are solving permanent problems. They are not trying to control the future. They are trying to fix the present. The system is built to manage risk, to coordinate resources, to prevent chaos. At first, it works extraordinarily well. Productivity rises, trade expands, conflict declines. The system feels like advancement itself. This is why systems gain trust so quickly. They deliver results. People align with them because life improves under their structure. Participation feels rational. Resistance feels unnecessary. But no system is built to stop growing. Every successful system expands its reach. New rules are added. New layers are created. New dependencies form. What begins as coordination becomes infrastructure. What begins as infrastructure becomes necessity. Over time, people stop asking whether the system serves them. They ask how to function inside it. Their lives reorganize around access. Work, housing, money, security, and identity all flow through the same channels. The system becomes invisible, not because it disappears, but because it becomes unavoidable. History shows this pattern repeating across empires, economies, and institutions. Rome built systems to govern territory and trade. Britain built systems to manage empire and finance. The 20th century built systems to coordinate global production, currency, and power. In every case, the system outlived its original purpose. It kept expanding long after the problems it was meant to solve had changed. And that is where the ending is written. Because systems do not fail when they are weak. They fail when they are strong enough to resist change. This is the story of how systems are built, why they persist long past their usefulness, and how history shows what happens next. And once a system proves it can deliver stability, it attracts authority. Power concentrates around whatever structure seems most capable of managing complexity. Decision-making shifts upward. Coordination replaces improvisation. This feels efficient, even necessary, as scale increases. At this stage, builders begin to codify success. Rules are written, standards are enforced, best practices become requirements. What once worked well becomes formalized, then universalized. The system stops being a tool and starts becoming the framework within which all tools must operate. This is where flexibility quietly begins to disappear, not through coercion, but through optimization. Processes are refined to handle the average case. Edge cases are tolerated only if they don't disrupt the whole. Anything that introduces uncertainty is discouraged. The system rewards those who align with it. Careers are built inside its structure. Capital flows through its channels. Education trains people to function within its logic. Over time, competence becomes indistinguishable from compliance. Rome standardized law and administration across its territories. Britain standardized trade, finance, and governance across its empire. Modern systems standardize currencies, contracts, supply chains, and data. Each step increases efficiency. Each step also reduces alternatives. Importantly, no one feels trapped yet. The system still delivers value. Opting in feels rational. Opting out feels risky. This is how dependence forms without force. As the system grows, it begins to shape behavior indirectly. Incentives matter more than commands. People do what the system rewards, even when it conflicts with long-term resilience. Short-term optimization becomes the dominant strategy. The builders interpret this alignment as success. Participation rates rise. Outputs increase. Stability appears entrenched. But beneath that stability, the system is narrowing the range of acceptable behavior. This is the point where history shows a crucial shift. The system stops adapting to people, and people begin adapting to the system. That reversal does not trigger collapse. It sets the trajectory. Once that trajectory is locked in, the ending becomes a matter of time. As people adapt to the system begins to adapt to itself. Internal logic replaces external reality as the primary guide for decision-making. What matters most is not whether outcomes improve, but whether processes are followed and metrics are met. This is where systems become self-referential. Success is measured by internal indicators rather than lived results. Growth is defined by expansion of the system's own footprint. Stability is defined by the absence of disruption, not by resilience. In this phase, feedback weakens. Signals from the outside arrive late, filtered, or distorted. Bad news becomes inconvenient. Warnings are softened. The system learns to protect itself from information that might force change. Rome experienced this as administrators prioritized imperial procedure over provincial conditions. Britain experienced it as imperial management diverged from domestic reality. Modern systems experience it when models, forecasts, and compliance replace direct understanding. As self-reference deepens, the cost of correction rises. Any change threatens interconnected components. Reform becomes complex, risky, and politically expensive. Leaders avoid it not because they are blind, but because the system punishes disruption. This creates a dangerous illusion of permanence. The system appears stable precisely because it resists change. Longevity is mistaken for health. Size is mistaken for strength. At this stage, critics are tolerated but marginalized. Dissent is framed as unrealistic, irresponsible, or uninformed. The system does not need to silence opposition. It only needs to ensure it cannot influence outcomes. What history shows clearly is that this phase can last a long time, decades, sometimes longer. The system continues to function. Life goes on. Prosperity may even continue unevenly. But the direction has shifted. The system is no longer evolving to meet reality. It is evolving to preserve itself. And once that shift occurs, the ending is no longer a surprise. It is simply delayed. This is how systems survive their usefulness and why history shows they always end the same way. As the system prioritizes its own preservation, complexity accelerates. Layers accumulate faster than they can be understood. Each new problem generates a new mechanism. Each mechanism introduces new dependencies. The structure grows denser, not stronger. Complexity feels like sophistication. It signals advancement. But in practice, it creates fragility. When too many components depend on each other, small disruptions cascade. No single failure is catastrophic, but combinations become unpredictable. This is the stage where control starts to slip without anyone feeling in charge of losing it. Decisions are made, but no one owns outcomes. Responsibility diffuses across institutions, departments, and processes. When something breaks, there's always a procedure to explain why no one is at fault. Rome reached this point when administration overwhelmed governance. Britain reached it when imperial management outpaced economic reality. Modern systems reach it when coordination costs exceed productive gains. At this stage, resilience is replaced by redundancy. Backup systems are added instead of fixing root problems. Temporary measures become permanent. Emergency responses harden into standard practice. The public experiences this as stagnation. Effort increases, rewards flatten, rules multiply, but clarity disappears. People feel managed rather than served. Trust thins not because the system is malicious, but because it feels distant and unresponsive. Importantly, the system still works. That is what makes this phase dangerous. Collapse is not visible. Warning signs look like noise. Critics sound alarmist. Stability appears intact. But history shows that once complexity reaches this level, reversal becomes nearly impossible. Simplifying the system would require dismantling parts that many depend on. No one wants to be responsible for pulling the wrong thread. From here on, the system can only move forward by adding more structure, more control, more rules, and each addition brings it closer to the point where complexity overwhelms coordination entirely. This is how systems become too big to fail, and therefore too big to save. As complexity deepens, the system enters a phase where maintenance replaces purpose. Energy is no longer spent improving outcomes, but preventing breakdown. The question shifts from what should this system achieve to how do we keep it running? This is a critical turning point. When a system is young, effort creates growth. When it matures, effort preserves stability. When it ages, effort merely prevents collapse. From the inside, these phases feel similar. From the outside, they are very different. Resources begin flowing towards stabilization rather than creation. Talent is redirected from innovation to compliance. Capital is used to plug gaps instead of build capacity. The system consumes more just to stay where it is. Rome reached this phase when taxation rose simply to maintain borders and bureaucracy. Britain reached it when debt and administration absorbed the surplus that once funded expansion. Modern systems reach it when constant intervention is required to prevent shocks from spreading. At this stage, the system becomes increasingly intolerant of disruption. Anything that threatens stability is treated as an existential risk. Change is slowed, experiments are constrained, the range of acceptable solutions narrows. This creates a paradox. The system needs adaptation to survive, but adaptation threatens the structure that now defines survival. Leaders are trapped managing decline without acknowledging it, not because they are dishonest, but because the system offers no safe path backward. For people living inside it, this phase feels like pressure without progress. Work intensifies, rewards stagnate, rules tighten, the promise that effort will lead to improvement fades. History shows this is when faith in the system begins to fracture. Not all at once, quietly, individually. People disengage emotionally long before they disengage materially. Once the system reaches this point, the ending becomes less about ideology or leadership and more about physics. Inputs rise, returns fall, complexity grows, flexibility disappears. From here, the system does not fail because it is attacked. It fails because it can no longer justify its own weight. As faith erodes, the system enters a phase where legitimacy must be actively manufactured. Trust is no longer assumed. It has to be reinforced through messaging, incentives, and constant reassurance. Authority becomes louder as confidence becomes thinner. This is where systems begin confusing visibility with control. Announcements multiply, narratives harden. Success is declared more often. not because outcomes improve, but because belief needs maintenance. The system speaks constantly to remind people it is still in charge. Rome relied increasingly on symbolism, titles, and ritual to project authority long after real power had thinned. Britain leaned on tradition and prestige as its material leverage declined. Modern systems depend heavily on communication, perception management, and narrative framing. The danger here is not deception. It is misalignment. When words and lived experience diverge too far, legitimacy collapses rapidly. People may comply outwardly, but internally they disengage. Obedience replaces belief. At this stage, enforcement quietly expands. Rules become stricter. Penalties increase. Monitoring intensifies. Not because rebellion is widespread, but because voluntary compliance is fading. Control shifts from shared agreement to supervision. This accelerates the breakdown. Systems that rely on enforcement are expensive to maintain and brittle under stress. Every additional layer of control signals weakness, even if it temporarily restores order. History shows this phase does not last long. Once legitimacy fractures, the system has limited time before resistance, avoidance, or alternative structures emerge. Not always through revolt, but through quiet withdrawal. People begin finding ways around the system instead of within it. Informal networks grow. Parallel arrangements form. Official channels lose relevance. At this point, the ending is no longer hypothetical. The system can still function, but it no longer commands loyalty. And systems without loyalty do not survive shocks. This is the stage where history shows how it always ends. Once loyalty gives way to compliance, the system enters a fragile equilibrium. It still operates, but it does so under tension. Every rule must be enforced. Every outcome must be monitored. Every deviation feels threatening. This is where cracks spread quickly. Not because people suddenly rebel, but because participation becomes conditional. Individuals and institutions begin hedging. They keep one foot inside the system and one foot outside it. They comply when necessary and bypass when possible. History shows this clearly. In late Rome, local elites cooperated with imperial authority only when it served them. In late British Empire, colonies and partners followed London's lead selectively. In late-stage centralized systems, organizations follow rules publicly while adapting privately. The system responds by tightening control. Centralization increases, decision-making moves upward. Flexibility disappears at the edges. This restores order briefly, but it also increases fragility. And when everything depends on the center, failure becomes systemic. This is the moment when unintended consequences accelerate. Policies designed to stabilize one area destabilize another. Enforcement breeds resentment. Uniform rules collide with local reality. The system becomes trapped, responding to its own distortions. At this stage, leaders often believe the solution is discipline, better execution, stricter adherence, more oversight. History shows the opposite. What is failing is not compliance, but alignment. The system's incentives no longer match reality. As misalignment grows, outcomes diverge further from intentions. Control looks firm on paper, but behavior shifts beneath the surface. The system governs appearances more than outcomes. This phase is dangerous because it feels manageable. The machinery still turns. The rules still apply. But resilience is gone. When the next shock arrives, there is no slack left to absorb it. The ending approaches not with chaos, but with rigidity. When the system finally encounters a shock it cannot absorb, the breakdown accelerates rapidly. This shock does not need to be unprecedented. It only needs to arrive at a moment when flexibility is gone and trust is already thin. At this stage, responses no longer stabilize the system. They expose its limits. Measures taken to restore order create new failures elsewhere. Confidence breaks unevenly, then spreads. What was once manageable becomes uncontrollable. History shows this is where coordination collapses. Institutions act independently. Policies conflict. Authority fragments across agencies, regions, and interests. No one is fully in charge, yet everyone is issuing directives. Rome experienced this as provinces defended themselves, rather than following imperial strategy. Britain experienced it when imperial retreat, economic strain, and domestic pressure converged faster than leadership could respond. In every case, the center lost the ability to synchronize action. Narrative control disappears here. Official explanations lag reality. People trust outcomes over words. Markets, communities, and individuals begin acting based on perceived risk rather than instruction. This is also where speed becomes decisive. Events move faster than deliberation. By the time decisions are made, conditions have already shifted. The system is always responding to yesterday. Attempts to reassert control intensify the problem. Emergency powers, restrictions, and sweeping interventions reveal how little margin remains. Each move signals urgency, not confidence. At this point, collapse is no longer about failure of intent or effort. It is mechanical. The system was built for stability under normal conditions, not for adaptation under stress. When stress becomes constant, the design turns against itself. This is the phase where history stops debating whether the system will hold and starts asking how much will survive the transition. After the breakdown becomes visible, the world does not wait for permission to move on. New arrangements emerge organically wherever stability can still be found. Power disperses, authority fragments, control relocates to smaller, more adaptive structures. Former centers struggle to respond because their tools were designed for scale, not speed. Large institutions reform slowly. Rules lag conditions. By the time adjustments are implemented, the environment has already changed again. This is when unofficial systems thrive. Informal networks, local authorities, private arrangements, and parallel economies fill the gaps left by failing coordination. What works spreads. What doesn't disappears, regardless of legality or tradition. For individuals, this stage is defined by uncertainty. Long-term planning becomes difficult. Old guarantees no longer hold. Security depends on adaptability rather than position. Those who recognize the shift early adjust faster. Historically, this phase is misread as chaos. In reality, it is reordering. The old system no longer sets the rules, but new ones are forming. Influence becomes regional. Power becomes situational. Rome fragmented into successor states that carried forward parts of its system. Britain transitioned into a reduced role within a new global order. Other systems have dissolved into multiple centers, each inheriting fragments of the old structure. The system that replaces global dominance is not weaker in every sense. It is simply different, less centralized, less predictable, less forgiving of error. This stage marks the end of inevitability. Control is no longer automatic. Every action carries consequence. The future is open again, but unstable. What history shows is not collapse into nothingness, but transformation under pressure. The world continues, just no longer organized around the system that once dominated it. The final stage is not destruction, it is normalization. This is when the system that once defined the world becomes just another participant within it. Its rules no longer dominate. Its assumptions no longer frame reality. Its voice is one among many. What ends is not the society, the people, or even the institutions themselves. What ends is the idea that the system is inevitable. The belief that it cannot be replaced, challenged, or outgrown quietly dissolves. History compresses this moment, but it is profound. Rome did not vanish when its system broke down. Life continued, trade continued, governance continued, just without a single center directing everything. Britain did not disappear when the empire ended. It adapted to a world it no longer organized. This is the distinction most people miss. Systems collapse, not civilizations. Structures fail, not human capacity. The ending is about scale, not survival. By the time this stage arrives, debates about leadership, ideology, or reform are largely irrelevant. The outcome is driven by structure, not intent. The system has exceeded its ability to adapt, and no amount of management can reverse that reality. Attempts to restore the old order fail because the conditions that sustained it no longer exist. Energy flows elsewhere. Influence disperses. New arrangements take shape around different incentives. History shows this ending is not dramatic by default. It is quiet, uneven, and confusing. Power shifts gradually, then suddenly. The world moves on without waiting for acknowledgement. They built the system to bring order, and it succeeded. Then it expanded until maintenance replaced purpose. Complexity replaced adaptability. Enforcement replaced legitimacy. That is how it always ends. Not with a single collapse, but with a shift in gravity. Control fades, rules lose reach, the system becomes history, and what once felt permanent becomes something studied, not lived.